Hello and welcome to this video for today, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. Hope you will enjoy. We're continuing on with our review of Modern Horizons 2. And today we're getting into the blue and black cards. I got this one right the first time around, unlike in the end of the last video where I got confused a little bit, but I have changed things around. But anyway, we're going to get right into looking at some of the great cards that we can fit into our commander decks from Modern Horizons 2 that are in blue and black for today. So first off, we've got a very big, or potentially at least very big, flying creature, which is a dragon as well. Muric regent, 5 and double blue, so 7 mana. It is a 3/3 naturally. It does have delve and flying. When it enters the battlefield, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each instant and sorcery exiled with it. And whenever an instant or sorcery leaves your graveyard, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. So maximum, in theory, it could be at 8/8. Now, sure, it doesn't do anything right away, but it does synergize with instants and sorceries leaving your graveyard, so it can keep getting bigger. And it's just a really big and fairly cheap threat for the most part that can keep, punching in there. So this could be an 8/8 flyer for 2, roughly speaking, at least, on the basis of, saying, well, if you paid that's full cost, whatnot, basically by delving, it would come out like that, if it entered the battlefield and whatnot. So, it can do some interesting things. I don't know whether you've got to find a deck to actually put this in, because it is hard to say, well, it doesn't do anything. And that's the problem, because it just exiles stuff and is a big beating threat. But I think if you want a big beating threat, this isn't a too bad one. And it wouldn't be too hard to get it out. So I'm just thinking that it could be good in some decks if you're milling cards just naturally and you just want more things to close out the game or whatnot. I think it could be good. And it is a dragon, so there might be some synergy there. So again, maybe if you're in Dragon Tribal, I don't know, or some sort of blue Dragon Tribal, I wouldn't know. But again, still, I think it's still pretty good and still can find some place. Maybe at lower power tables, certainly. Alright, next, Fractured Sanity, triple blue, sorcery, each opponent mills 14 cards. That's a lot of milling. But it has cycling for 2, and when you cycle it, each opponent also mills 4. So, that's pretty darn good. If you can't cast this or hard cast this for triple blue, which I don't know how you could not, but then again, if you're in a really weird color, slot, I guess maybe it might not happen. You can just cycle it away and each opponent mills 4. Like, even if you're not a mill deck, I still think, just drawing a card and making each opponent mill 4, unless they're playing Reanimator too much, they're not really going to have that much recourse to be able to get those cards back that much. But then again, I still think that Reanimation and Recursion and whatnot are very strong effects and more people should play them. But again, I still think getting rid of more cards, especially when, somebody set up something on the top of their deck, can be really useful. So I still think if you're in a mill deck, you might want to think about it. It's still fairly good in some other decks, just depending. But yeah, I still think it would be worth it. Next, Inevitable to Betrayal, another suspend card. You suspend it for 1 and double blue. and it suspends for 3 turns. So when it goes off, you get a bribery, essentially, a suspended bribery. So you search a target opponent's library for a creature card, put that card into the battlefield under your control, and then you shuffle their library. So, getting a suspend bribery, yeah, that's okay. And they haven't reprinted bribery in a very long time, so if you want to get a bribery for your deck, I think you might want to pick this up, because I don't think they're going to reprint bribery at any point soon. So even a spell that takes 3 turns to actually do the thing that you want to do might be worth it if you're in that sort of style of theft deck. You can get your opponent's best thing. But, I don't know how good this actually is. But again, people are playing really powerful creatures, and you have to play really powerful creatures in EDH because, you've got to find ways to win the game. So you've got to find the creatures that do a lot for you. So, I don't know, it just seems like this will find some targets with some people. Again, I think, if you find any creature that has some utility that you can utilize, because that's the thing, if you steal something of somebody else's, you should not just steal something that you can't, utilize yourself. If you find a creature that has a green activated ability or whatever, you shouldn't get that, because it's like, well, do you have green in your deck? No. Well, you can't activate its actual ability, so it doesn't do anything. So it's just like, you have to remember, oh yes, I'm not in black or whatever, so I can't activate this thing's ability, therefore I should not take it. Just those little corner things, and just remember, those little tips and whatnot that, go along with stealing people's stuff, because again, you don't want to just get something out of somebody's deck and then go, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do with it because it doesn't work with anything that I'm actually doing. Yes. Now what do I do? That would be the problem with it. But again, I still think it's pretty good for certain decks if you're really into stealing people's stuff. Of course, I'd just rather run my own stuff, especially with the 3-turn waiting period. I'd just rather get my own things and actually advance my plan rather than waiting around, because, again, a lot of people are going to see this coming and then be like, well, I don't want you to steal my stuff, so I'm just going to kill you. So there is that downside. But anyway, still think it could be good. Rise and Shine, a sorcery for 1 and a blue. Target non-creature artifact you control becomes a 0/0 artifact creature. Put 4 +1/+1 counters on each artifact that became a creature this way, and you can overload it for 6, 4 and double blue. So, mono blue artifacts. Mono blue has been heavy into artifacts for a long time. We're going to talk about a couple cards here that are into artifacts as well. This is going wide with artifacts, or it wants to go wide with artifacts. I think that this is pretty good if you're in certain artifact builds and you're not in CDH. It's pretty good to make a army of all of your mana rocks that have been doing nothing for a few turns, and then just punch in there with all your mana rocks and whatnot, get back into the game. It's one of those sort of after a board wipe sort of cards that you just sort of play, and suddenly you've got a massive army of all these mana rocks attacking people and maybe possibly winning the game. I don't know. So I think if you're in an artifact deck, you might want to consider playing it. Alright, next up, another artifact card, Thought Monitor, 6 and a blue, 2/2. It has affinity for artifacts and flying. When it ETBs, we draw 2 cards. So, nice to draw a couple cards off of an ETB, and it does have affinity, so it is a lot cheaper than what it actually is. For 1 mana for a 2/2 that draws you 2 cards, that's not too damn bad. Even 2 mana for 2 cards and a 2/2 flyer isn't too bad. 3 mana, yes, still not that bad. Like Baleful Strix is played, and that's 2 mana, draws you a card. So I think this is a strict upgrade to Baleful Strix in a lot of ways. It's single colors. It's a lot. It can be a lot cheaper. It can be a lot more expensive too. But as well, it draws you 2 cards rather than drawing you 1 card. Whereas that's the problem I find with Baleful Strix. It's kind of like, oh, okay, it's only a cantrip. I would rather draw 2 cards than draw a card. Even when you've got Panharmonicon and other effects like that, I just find that if you have these sorts of cards that actually draw you 2 cards, then you're getting more cards out of what you've got. So I just think that these sorts of things are better overall. So again, same thing as the last one. If you're in an artifact deck, I would consider putting it in. Next, Mystic Rejection. 2 and a blue enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you scry 1. Whenever an opponent discards a card, whenever you discard a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. So the little bit of scrying, yeah, that's okay, but that's not really worth it that much. It's okay, but it's not really worth it. I'm not 100% sure where you can find space for this. Maybe Grixis Madness or Grixis Discard style decks. I'm not sure. But again, if you can find the synergies to work around this card, the value that it can provide you just milling a few cards and the scry, yeah, sure, can be worth it. I still think it's okay. It's just an uncommon enchantment. So maybe if you're some kind of enchantment deck, it might just be worth it if you can also find some discard outlets. There are some that are in Grixis and whatnot, so I would think about it if you want to try to do a whole bunch of different things, especially if you can take advantage of putting cards into your opponent's graveyards. That's what I sort of think about some of these cards. If you can reanimate your opponent's creatures, steal them from the graveyards, copy them, things like this, or whatnot, things like that, I would definitely think about getting something like this in there and doing something with it. Next up, Ravaging Visionary, a 1 and a blue, 1/1. Pay 1, tap it, draw a card, then discard a card. Okay, that's not too exciting. Delirium, 2 and a blue, draw a card, activate this ability only if there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard. So not amazing. Not amazing. No. It's just the looter. It has a little bit of an upside. But, I was just talking about that enchantment to discard cards. This discards cards, and it therefore mills you your opponent's some cards. So it can work with that. So I'm just thinking that there are some applications for it. I'm just not sure how much. Again, if you can turn on Delirium, that's just fine. Drawing a card every third turn or whatever, still okay. Even like just looting away bad things to draw more cards and whatnot, isn't that bad. We see that in red, and we do see it a little bit in blue. It depends what your deck's doing. I think if you're a graveyard deck or whatnot, or you are reanimating stuff or whatnot, you have other effects that trigger off of some of these things, then you might consider running it. Next up, we've got another interesting enchantment at least. 1 and a blue, pay 1, discard a card, create a 0/3 crab creature token, Delirium. Crabs you control get +1/+1. Okay, so, just making free crabs, just basically fogging not free, but for 1 mana, for very cheap at least, making these free walls that you can chump block any attack with, seems pretty darn good. So you can protect yourself pretty well with it. I think it's a lot better than, Ghostly Prison and things like that. I think that this is more active because, sure, you've got to pay the mana and you've got to keep your mana up. What does blue want to do? Leave its mana up, for the most part. So I think that's okay. Delirium, not that amazing. But again, if you're reanimating stuff, this whole discarding a card might not be that bad. Yeah, sure, it's not the best thing that you want to do, but if you have other ways to take advantage of it, if you're a madness deck of some sort or whatnot, or if you're a graveyard deck, reanimator deck, whatnot, these sorts of things, it can be worthwhile. So again, I would think about it if you're in those sorts of decks. Next up, Specimen Collector. 4 and a blue, 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, we create a 1/1 green squirrel, a 0/1 crab, and when it dies, we create a token that's a copy of target token we control. So, it's a little bit janky, but it does make 2 bodies, and when it dies, it can copy another token creature. Brutaclad might want this. It's quite alright just making a couple bodies. And again, in those sorts of decks, you can take advantage of those tokens, do other things with them, make them into other things. If you can get this to die, reanimate it, do other things with it, I think it's pretty good and can do a bit in your deck. It depends. Again, just think about it if you are out there and, maybe pick one up in your pre-release or in your box. Certainly can be well worth it. I might even put it in my tumor deck. I think it's pretty good there. Just as making a couple of tokens and, cloning another token when it dies. Still pretty good. Next, Tide Shaper. 1 mana for a merfolk wizard. 1/1. Has kicker. When it ETBs, if it was kicked, target land becomes an island as long as this creature's on the battlefield, and it gets +1/+1 as long as an opponent controls an island. Look, most of the time, people are going to control an island. Not all of the time, but most of the time. So that's kind of like a free roll anyway, and you can also turn someone else's land into an island. So that means that, 2 players now, at least, in theory, will have an island. And what do merfolk like? Island walk. So I think that this can be a really good card in merfolk tribal commander decks. It's much better than Spreading Seas, and I see Spreading Seas see a little bit of play in merfolk decks. I would rather play this because it's actually a creature as well, so it can get the buffs from all your lords and whatnot, and things like that, and it can draw you cards off of all your, card draw style effects that actually care about, of a certain type and whatnot. So I would think about running this if you're in merfolk tribal and you want to get rid of your Spreading Seas, because I don't think Spreading Seas does that much for you. When you're mostly a creature deck, you want more creatures, you want more bodies, you want more things to be able to kill your opponents with. The next one, and the last one for blue, Ethereum Spinner, 2 and a blue, 1/2. Whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, create a 1/1 colorless stopped artifact creature token with flying. Now, this is pretty good. Really good. 3 mana, and, it doesn't specify non-creature or whatnot, or it doesn't specify creature. As long as you're casting spells that are 4 or greater, you get an additional 1/1 popped up. It's good in token decks. Again, Brutaclad might go in there. I might look at it, putting it in my Teamer deck. I'm looking at some of these cards and going, well, maybe that could go in. It exists, therefore I might consider it. So, it's always that way where you always look at some of these cards and assess them and go, okay, I need to look at it and look at the other cards that are in my deck. How many 4 or greater things do I have, or whatnot. And, is, getting a 1/1 every now and again worth it? And I think the answer is yes, because, if you have things like Blessed Sanctuary or Oketra, these effects work. Just getting an additional 2/2 or an additional 4/4 is good So just getting an additional 1/1. Maybe Brayer decks want this, like non-CEDH Brayer decks want this. Just if you're casting a lot of spells that are 4 or greater, and just getting an additional Thopter is just pretty good. And it is an artifact creature as well, so that's there as well. So it can really do good work in certain decks. So if your artifact matters, or your Thopter tribal, or you're just like janky tokens of some sort, or you just want additional value, you can sack these things for mana, or you can tap them for mana, or there are other effects that you can use that, this creates, something else, and therefore you get more value and more value. You've got doubling system, you've got parallel lives, you've got all these other effects. I think it can be really good. Alright, so now we're going to be moving on to black. And first up we have an archon, but it looks very, very cool in this artwork, almost like a dragon. But Archon of Cruelty, 6 and double black for a 6/6 flyer. When it enters the battlefield or attacks target opponent, sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. You draw a card and gain 3 life. Now, it's not 100% symmetrical because it's making them sacrifice a creature and you don't get a creature back from your graveyard or anything like that. And it is just target opponent. So that's there as well. It's not as good in Commander, but it's still alright. It's on enters and on attacks, so it's really quite good when it starts doing stuff. It's very Sun Titan-esque and all of the other Titans-esque, whatnot, that it does something when it enters and it also does something when it attacks, so you're going to get some amount of value in it. And of course, it seems like always when you're playing Commander that there is one player that is just so far ahead of everyone else that you just need to play that whole king-making game or whatnot, where you need to take that person down. For 8 mana, this isn't the cheapest effect now at all. And there might not be much to push this further than what it already is, but I still think it can go in certain decks. There are lots of things that can reanimate this thing very easily. Now, yes, of course, again, it's not the best reanimation target, but there are still some things that I think you can do with it, and I think it is a strict upgrade on some other things. So I think that, if you want to put this in your deck, it's certainly not a bad option. But again, it's not really clear what you're going to do with it. Like, gaining life isn't that relevant. It's probably the least relevant part of this. It kind of has half strike to a degree when it enters or when it attacks. So that's kind of interesting to a degree. It does more damage than what it actually has as power. So it's kind of a 9/6 in a way. But the 3 damage is always going to happen to a degree. And they're always going to have to sacrifice a creature and discard a card, unless they don't have any cards or creatures or whatnot to sacrifice or discard. But at least they're losing 3 life when you're doing these effects as well. So that's still there, I think. It's still worth thinking about. So I would certainly keep my eye on it and think about it in certain decks, and it's certainly not the worst top end either. In certain decks, I would take out certain cards over it easily. So that's all I mean. I would consider it over certain other cards that I do see played. So, consider it for certain things. Next, Dali Void Walker, 2 mana, 3/2 with Shadow. Alright, so first off, just that on its own. Those things are very good. I think that on that basis, you could run this in like a deck like Ninjas and whatnot, because it's evasive and easily gets in there. It's a cheap creature, and even if you're not even if you're always ninjutsuing this thing out, it's still not that bad. It's still really good, to have that in your deck. And then it has the ley line of the void text. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead with a void counter on it. And then it's not even done. The text box continues beyond that. It's not only Leyline of the Void on a 2-mana creature, which has Shadow and is a 3/2, which is ridiculous already. You can sacrifice this thing to choose an exiled card with a void counter on it, and you may play it this turn. But that's not all. You can also play it without paying its mana cost. What the heck is going on with this card? This card is so pushed. This is such a good card. Yeah, sure, it's not really, it's like kind of opposition agent or whatnot to that degree. I think it's strictly kind of a CDH card. But then again, it's just a leyline of the void on a stick. Yeah, sure, to me, the sacrifice it to get a creature from an opponent's exile or whatever is not the thing that I would probably use this for. But just like shutting down other graveyard decks is just amazingly good. And then just a 3/2 that basically can't be blocked, that is dumbly good. Like, if I ever go, well, I really need, to get one of my opponent's creatures one time out of 100 or whatnot because it actually wins me the game or whatnot, or it will effectively win me the game, I will happily sacrifice this thing. It shuts down graveyards, and again, it's just more things that you would probably want to use. So I just think that this is a really great card. Again, it's not going to go in every deck, but I think it would go in a lot of decks. This is really worth having a look at and thinking about where can I put this? Because I think everyone wants some form of graveyard hate. So I would definitely think about running it in certain decks, especially if you care about, this a very evasive creature that you can easily replay and easily get other value out of if it's going to die or get exiled or whatnot, whatever, and things like that. So I definitely think there's space for it. Next up, Necrogyfe, a 5 mana rather, 3 and double black Legoyf. Its power is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyards, so that could be very big. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card. So it also has Madness for 1 and double black, and it has 4 toughness. So, it does die to some things, but I think you can easily reanimate this thing. That's not a huge problem. And there's some new reanimation cards that I'm hyped for. So definitely, if you're in a Madness deck, I would definitely think about putting this in, because, you just discard cards and then you don't care because you're like, well, I'm just going to discard something that I can cast or that I can reanimate. So you want to be in Madness or Reanimator style decks with this card, and then you're just forcing your opponents to discard cards. Maybe in a Tergra deck, this is pretty good, and it's just a big beating threat. I don't know, like, that seems pretty good. It helps you out in your game plan, and then it slows other people in their game plan and whatnot. So I think it's really quite good, and some people might want to consider it in some decks. Alright, next one up is the reanimation that I was talking about. Persist. 1 and a black sorcery. Return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. So it's pretty much anime dead, except it's on a sorcery. So, that's pretty dang good. I think, again, if you're in a reanimator deck, this isn't too bad. Like it's 1 more than Unearth or whatever and whatnot, and it's the same cost as animate dead and dance with dead and whatnot. So I definitely think it can see play, certainly. Maybe if you're in like a deck that cares about spells, like what's her name? The one that flashes things back. Can't remember its name. Grixis. What's her name? Kess, Dissident Mage. Things like that. Then you can get 2 creatures back for the price of, 1 spell, essentially. But you would have to be a very specific deck and not CDH and whatnot for that to be a thing. But again, I still think that there are chances that those sorts of decks do exist. And they do exist, certainly. So as well, I would certainly consider thinking about it in certain decks as well. So if you're Reanimator, I would think about it. Next, Unmarked Grave. Pretty much another Entomb. Search your library for a non-legendary card, put that card in your graveyard, then shuffle your library. So again, yep, if you're a Reanimator deck or you want to get specific cards into your graveyard, this is very cheap. Effect, yeah, sure. Again, with the last card, non-legendary, that's a little bit of a restriction. But again, I just think if you're in a deck that cares about the graveyard, cares about reanimation, and whatnot, just entombing or another version of entomb into your graveyard isn't bad. So I would think about running it if you're in that style of deck. Next, Legion Vanguard, 1 and a black, 2/2. You pay 1, you sacrifice another creature, and this guy explores for you. Exploring, we've found out, is actually pretty good in Commander, because especially if you're a graveyard style deck, and just having a fairly cheap sack outlet is not bad either. You explore, you reveal the top. If it's a land, it goes to your hand. If it's not a land, you can leave that card on top, or you can put it into your graveyard. So it's really good with lots of different things, and in a lot of those decks, you want a repeatable way to do these things. You want a repeatable source of exploring, and you probably want it on a creature. And again, it does a lot for you if you're in very specific decks. So if you're in those specific decks that care about milling things into their graveyard and whatnot, Mordrotha, Sidisi, Merrin, different things like that, I would definitely consider it. Next one, before we get too far off kilter with anything else, Underworld Hermit, 4 and double black, 3/3. When he ETBs, we create a number of 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens equal to our devotion to black. So, of course, I know why I'm putting this, but, just creating a few creatures, mono black devotion is kind of a thing. Gary is obviously the best one, but this one, it's another one. You can utilize these bodies in lots of different ways by sacking them. Skull Clamp is a thing, people, and a very powerful thing. So, just making a few 1/1s, you can get in there with combat if you go wide enough or whatnot, and that's, fine. You can use them for sacrifice fodder, whatnot. There's all kinds of different things that you can do with them. And there's also ways, again, the same with like Gary, that you can keep looping this and keep getting more and more squirrels to sack more and more things and whatnot. So, and just anything that creates more bodies, overall than what it actually is, costing is sort of really quite good. All right. Next, Violin Tumor, 4 mana, 2 and double black. It's a death touch, entomb on a stick. And it's a zombie warlock. So again, same thing as a couple of the other cards. You're a reanimator deck, you're a graveyard deck. If you're zombies, maybe as well, because zombies are a relevant tribe. You want to get things actively in your graveyard to get them back or to get value out of them in other ways, whatnot. I think this is very good. Entomb on a stick, pretty darn good card. Next one up, Young Necromancer. At first, I actually thought this was Liliana, but it's actually not Liliana. So I got that wrong. 4 mana, 4 and a black. So 5 mana total. Sorry, 2/3. When it ETBs the battle, our battlefield, we may exile 2 cards from our graveyard. When we do, we return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Look, we've just been talking this whole time about a lot of these cards that have synergy with reanimation. This is your reanimating card. This is so much better than the reanimating card that, pings you for a whole bunch of life or whatever. Even if you're exiling a couple cards, so what? Who cares? Like, you exile a couple of lands or whatever, or just some bad creatures or bad spells that you can't use anymore or whatnot, whatever. You want to get your best things out of this, and if you can abuse this, use it over and over again, it's really, really good. So I think that this is just another card that goes into graveyard decks. I'm definitely putting it in some of mine because it's really, really good. I really think some people should play more reanimation and recursion and whatnot because, like a lot of the time, the spells that say, your board gains indestructible are inconsistent to that extent where, like, oh, okay, the board wipe happens, I didn't have it in hand. Oh, now look, I top decked the thing that would have saved my board, and that's pretty much the only card that I have in hand. Now what do I do with the spell that, would have saved my team? Nothing. If that is a reanimation spell of some sort, it is so much better to top deck it. Like, if it's sitting in your hand and you can't use it or can't do really much with it, then it's not that good. But when isn't it going to be that good, really? Like, it's just that whole thing. There's almost always something in your graveyard. Somebody's going to kill something in the game. So it's going to have a use most of the time. You can even, again, with the other card that I was just talking about, pitch your own cards into the graveyard to reanimate them to do other things. So I don't get it. I just think that this is a really good card and people should play more effects like this. Speaking of more effects like this, echoing return, 1 black, sorcery, return target creature card, and all other cards with the same name as that card from your graveyard to your hand. Look, this isn't that bad. 1 mana to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand isn't a bad rate. But I really think that this shines a lot more and a lot better in Relentless Rests or in Shadowborn Apostles style decks. So it's a very narrow card in that way. It shines the most in those decks, and I don't think many other decks would run it, but maybe they will if they print more cards that say basically you can have any number of this card in your deck, which I'm sure that they will, or 6 or 7 or whatever it is, some other variant of that, then I still think it's pretty good. And even just 1 mana return something from the graveyard to your hand is still pretty damn good. So I think it can see a bit of play outside of some of those decks. Maybe if you're just in 1 or 2 colors, it depends, maybe. There are some other better things in some other colors and whatnot, but again, I would still think about it. It does depend on what options you've got, because the less colors you're in, the less options you've got, and the less good options that are cheap. Next up, we've got Nested Shambler. 1 mana, 1/1. When it dies, we create X tapped 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens where X is its power. Look, reanimation. Been talking about it this whole time. You play this dorky 1/1 zombie. You get a squirrel out of it. You sacrifice it to something or whatever. Even this is even without like augmenting its power in any way. You get a squirrel. You bring it back. You get another squirrel. Sack it to get another squirrel. Bring it back. Sack it to get another squirrel. You just keep making squirrels. You keep making other tokens. It works with so many things. Unmarked graves. All these different things that are in black and whatnot that just love you to sacrifice things. you can ping people, you can drain people, you can make more and more bodies and whatnot, and just kill people with all kinds of different things that this will do. So it's a really good card that I think can see play if you're in an aristocraty or reanimatey style deck that really wants to abuse things over and over again and get more and more value out of sacrificing things and whatnot. Right. The last one. Sinister Starfish. 1 and a black, 0-3. Tap it to Surveil 1. Surveil 1 is pretty good, pretty underrated Surveil ability overall. I think, if you're, again, graveyard decks, reanimator decks, we've been talking about it this whole time, this is a pretty good card. Yeah, sure, it's not the best card. You can stifle a block. Somebody goes to attack you. I'll block it with the Starfish, and in response, before damage, I'll Surveil 1. Still pretty good. Even if it dies, it's still pretty good. It does something active, and it gives you that card advantage that you want in those graveyard decks. So I would definitely think about running it in those style of decks. Anyway, that is it for this video for today, guys. So we've made it. We've done it. I don't know how we've done it or how we've made it, but we've done it. We've made it. What do you guys think? Tell me. You can tell me. It's all good. It's all fine. I love to hear from you guys because some of you guys come up with things that I can't come up with because I don't know every card in existence and I don't know every combo that exists. I know a lot of them, but not all of them, So it's great when I see comments from you guys telling me, some of these great ways that you can, utilize these cards and whatnot, and just get the value that you need out of these cards and whatnot. So, I would love to hear from you. Also, as I say all the time in these things, at the end with the recorded ending, it really does help if you share the video around and whatnot. It helps the channel out. I really want to do more for you guys, to bring you more content. I want to bring you better content. I'm trying to better these videos and better the presentation and all this sort of stuff every single time. I'm learning more and more and more as I go along and whatnot. I'm trying to keep in the rhythm of uploading regularly and whatnot. So, I always have content that I'm thinking about creating, and there's a lot of content that's on the channel that's going to be uploaded in the next couple of days, in the next couple of weeks after all this Modern Horizon stuff is done. Also, just all this Modern Horizon stuff. We've still got a couple more videos left in this series before we're done. And also, just, tell me as well, do you guys want to see me, build a deck around any of the new legendaries? I forgot to sort of say that in the legendaries video. Let me know. Write them down there. Which decks do you want to see me build? I'll take all notes and, try to put some decks together for you guys and make more content for you guys. So, yep, I hope to see you again in the next one. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today, and if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.